Hello, everyone. Today we are interviewing Jessica Helen Lopez. Jessica is one of our specially featured artists for the fall 2018 issue of the Chachalaca Review Identity. She is the City of Albuquerque Poet Laureate, and we are very honored to be able to do this special feature of her. Jessica, can you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually the City of Albuquerque Poet Laureate Emeritus, which means I'm the former Poet Laureate. I was the second Poet Laureate of the city, and we're actually on our fourth now. So it's been a few years since I held that post, and that ran for 2 years. But soy Chicana, soy mestiza. I am an adjunct instructor with the University of New Mexico Chicano Studies Department, and have been teaching in that department now, I think going on my 7th semester. I'm also an educator with the Native American Community Academy, and I've been with them many, many years in some capacity or another. Right now I'm teaching their dual enrollment credit poetry class, and I work for the network, so I also do communications and outreach, things of that nature. And yeah, I've been a slam poet for many, many years. I'm not so competitive anymore, but I started in late 2005, and by 2006 I was on my first slam team. And I've been on various slam teams, I don't know, maybe about 7 or more. And because of that, got to travel around pretty extensively across the country. And also did some individual competitions through the Women of the World Poetry Slam invite and the Individual World Poetry Slam invite. And it's been quite a blessing. It's opened up a lot of opportunities for me, especially in the way of publication. I don't think a lot of people put together the idea of like spoken word artists and publishing in the publishing world, but that's just not the case anymore. Lots and lots of spoken word artists, poets have a lot of, publications, whether they're in anthologies or they're online or they have their own collections. So I'm about to release my 4th collection of poetry in 2019 of February. I'm a mom. I have a 16-year-old daughter. And I also have 3 fur babies. So I'm busy. Yeah. So that's a little bit about me.
So let's start talking about the works themselves. The special feature includes works from Jessica's The Mother series and also a very cool sneak peek at Jessica's new and upcoming book, Cunt Bomb. Can you go ahead and tell us about the work that's being featured?
Thank you for asking. The Mother series is going to be included in Cunt Bomb, which is a second release, but it's going to be a full-length collection. The first time I released Cunt Bomb was a few years ago, and it was for the purposes of a tour that I was doing, and I needed some materials, and so I created a chapbook with my publisher, Swimming with Elephants Publication. My editor is Katrina Crespin. And so we put that together, and it was actually well received. First of all, it's pretty, the title itself is attention grabbing. Some would say salacious. I would not, as an intersectional feminist. I always had the idea that I wanted to add more poems to Cunt Bomb, and finally got around to working with my editor. We're also busy to put together a full-length collection. So there's going to be the original pieces that were found in the chapbook Cunt Bomb, and then additional poems. For instance, like the Mother series that you mentioned, Regina, that will be in Cunt Bomb as well. And then various other pieces that align with the theme of Cunt Bomb. And Cunt Bomb, is meant to kind of, incite or even inflame, or even, I would say, be an agent for being an agent for provocateur work. I know that Cunt Bomb, the word cunt itself isn't a term that's usually used on a daily basis. You don't hear it often unless it's in a derogatory kind of context. And I really wanted to reclaim that word and kind of delve into the history of the word, itself, and then kind of expound upon it through narratives in my poems. And so I'm really excited. That's going to be February 2019. And I was able to ask some really good friends and writers that I admire to create some blurbs for me and a new foreword. So I'm really happy to say that the foreword is written full-length collection by Dominique Christina, and she's a poet based out of Denver. She's also the 2-time winner of the WELPS competition in the years past, and WELPS is, the acronym is Women of the World Poetry Slam Nationals, and she won that actually twice. which is record-breaking in itself. She's a phenomenal writer. I admire her work very much. And so I sent her over my manuscript and asked if she wouldn't mind reading it and writing the foreword. And she said, yes. I was elated. I'm still elated. Can't quite believe it. And so that'll be included in my book. And I think that really sets the temperature, you know, and the tone of the themes found in the book. You know, just I debunking a lot of stereotypes around the idea of womanhood and gender roles and even gender identity and the idea of fluidity when it comes to those intersectional identities. Also, you know, my personal vision of feminism through verse, through poetry, and also just the reclamation of the word cunt in itself, as far as, you know, creating counter narratives that challenge rape culture, you know, that's embedded in language itself, but just the way, you know, society interacts on a daily, you know. And so, again, I kind of write about various topics that for me, I think are cathartic. You know, I'm a domestic violence survivor. As a child, I had to endure a lot of things that I've survived. And so that's my medicine. That's why I write about it. And Cunt Bomb really touches upon those issues for me as a young girl, a young queer girl who grew up along the border, you know. And so, you know, a lot of my formative years were spent along the U.S.-Mexico frontera, you know, and coming from California and migrating north through Nuevo Mexico, it's really informed my experiences and how I write about them. And so Cunt Bomb's got a little bit of everything, but it definitely has a whole lot of what I'd like to call radical feminism. Because even now, when you say the F word, you know, feminism, just the other day, somebody nonchalantly threw out the term Nazi feminism. You know, oh, they're just a Nazi feminist, you know. And so trying to have those conversations around kind of unpacking those derogatory slurs and the pejoratives that are still, you know, being tossed around because it's embedded in the way that I think we're, you know, as a whole, the master narrative is still kind of instilling through media or representation, you know, in the books we read or the news feeds that we see, you know, or the narratives that we view. So that's the kind of work that I'm focused on through Cunt Bomb and my work in general.
It can be kind of frustrating sometimes to have these conversations with, well, everyone. How do you deal with that?
You know, well, it depends. If I'm angry, then I'll write a poem, right? And but also I'll read it out loud or I'll have a conversation. I think it's all about the way that you kind of engage that individual or engage that space. So I've been a teacher for a really, really long time, and of course I invite discourse. You know, not everybody's to agree. And so I think if the space is safe and there's enough allowance for everybody to have a conversation that is meaningful, then those conversations can happen. But it's not my job or my responsibility, you know, to convince everybody about, you know, what does it mean to, you know, what does it mean to unpack the term intersectional feminism or creating safe spaces or what's rape culture for that matter, you know, because that would be exhausting as a woman of color. You know, it's just not my responsibility. I don't have the time for that. But if there's some meaningful discourse that can happen, maybe it's because of my poem, or maybe it's because of somebody else's poem, or maybe it's because of some lesson, you know, that happened in a classroom, or maybe it's just a conversation at a bus stop. You know, if it's available, accessible, and safe, and everybody involved is ready to have that conversation, then that works. Otherwise, you go back to your organizations or the groups that you're working with, and you think about how you can align your efforts in a way that your messaging is out there to talk about equity and what it means to be equitable. You know, to sum it up, I would just say I pick my battles.
When did you first get the inspiration to start writing Cunt Bomb? Or when did, I guess, you feel like you like had to start?
Well, because there was a really beautiful piece, a poem that I wanted to share with a group of young women at a high school, and it was an alternative charter school for young mothers. And the poem was by Marty McConnell. And it was it was a poem about praising the body. And in the poem, she uses the word cunt, right? And this poem is just phenomenal. It's just an orchestra unto itself. And my somewhat supervisor, a male, was aghast that I would share that poem. And I had built all this lesson plan and, a discussion template around it. And, there were other poems that accompanied it. But I mean, it was as if I'd slapped his face with the wet noodle. He just couldn't believe it. Like, how could you? And this is, oh my God, these are youth. I'm like, these are also young women who own their bodies, and they're young mothers. And if we can't talk about our own bodies in the way we choose to do so, or sex or sexuality or choice or reproductive rights, and because of this one word, it incited like this. It was just like, when I used the word inflammatory, that's exactly what happened. But it was coming from the perspective of a white male cis, in charge. And so the lesson plan never did. And I realized I couldn't really work under those conditions. So I completed the last of my workshops with that particular school, that contract. And then I just moved on. Lo and behold, I wrote a poem called Cunt Bomb. I remember not frantically, but pretty charged, typing out this poem. And then I told my editor about it, and I was needing a chapbook at that time. And I was like, what if we named the chapbook Cunt Bomb? And she was like, yes. She immediately agreed. And so I had messaged her this. And by the time I got home driving from wherever I was at, she'd already said, yes, 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 yes. And so she agreed immediately. And that was just kind of the genesis of Cunt Bomb, which has now been a few years ago. Even since then, I've made t-shirts and tank tops. And, because sometimes working artists, they make their own merchandise. So publish these books. They have an ISBN, the chapbook even does. But I made a bunch of tank tops and shirts and stickers, and they just sold out on my first two readings on my mini tour. And I didn't have any merch after that. And ever since then, people have been like, when are you gonna make some more shirts? And I still see people on national stages or at various bookstores somewhere in South Padre Island, reading a poem, and they're wearing a shirt that says Cunt Bomb. And that makes me so happy. And it makes me so happy that people are willing to kind of, buck against the normative, because I'm sure it invites probably conversation, but also probably some disdain as well.
Clearly, it requires bravery to be able to write about things that people might not always agree with. And like you've said before, it's intended to start conversations. Do you have any advice for other artists or writers who might be a little afraid to be writing about things that not everyone would agree with?
Yeah, that's a, I just had that conversation with a couple of students recently, and that comes up time and time again, whether, it is an older writer or a younger writer, how do you kind of deal with that? I would say, if anything, write it, right? And then put it in your journal, or you're typing it in your document in your, your Google folder, whatever it is. Write it to get it out, so that it's an external representation of your creativity, because as an artist, that's what you want to do. And then sit with it and see if it's something you want to share, that you want to submit, that you want to read, if it's something you painted that you want to show on the gallery walls, or a photo. Take your time with it. But in the end, I'm always going to say to share it. One of my mentors said a while ago, oh, I'm a little careful with the things that I write, or I change names. I'm like, yes, I agree with that. Okay. But, my mentor also said something like, well, there's just some poems I'm just not, I just won't even write, I won't share. And I thought about that, and I was like, well, why is it that I do that then? Is that a lack? Is that, a trait that I shouldn't be proud of? And the thing is, as a survivor of domestic violence when I was younger, I couldn't tell. I was muted, I was censored, I was told to keep quiet about things. The violence I experienced, or the violence I observed in my home, and even in my extended family. And so I wasn't allowed to. And now no one is telling me I'm not allowed to, but it's that internal censorship in me that's saying, oh, you can't say that. And then I'm like, fuck it. Yes, I can. Because I need to. There's this like need, this burning desire that I need to. Maybe it's in the vein of confessionalism. A lot of my poets, my favorite poets, have written in that genre of like poetry or nonfiction or essay or shorts, nonfiction, essay, memoir, in the vein of confessionalism. And I always feel like, oh, they went through that. And that's their honest interpretation and depiction of it. That doesn't make me feel so ashamed that I'm going through this, whether it be a bout of depression or anxiety, because I suffer from a lot of PTSD. And so that makes me feel better. So I feel like if I write it and it makes me feel better, and if somebody else gets their hands on it and reads it and it makes them feel better, then that's what really counts. Not that so-and-so might read it, or some, distant cousin or a living relative. I guess I'm just not so concerned with that anymore, because I was so censored as a younger person before that I just don't subscribe to that anymore. But I can see, oh, that could still affect an artist, and they may have to think about it. I respect that. Nonetheless, though, I'm always going to say to write it, paint it, take a picture of it, and then think about what you'll do with it later, because it's better to get it out, because that's the act of medicine right there, and then see where you want to go with it.
So how about your writing process? How does, a poem form in your mind and make its way to its page?
Various ways. Sometimes I'll be reading poetry and I get inspired to write poetry. I start thinking in poetic verse. It's really weird. Yeah. Or the way I describe things, I'll describe to somebody where to park, and then, I might, I don't know, refer to it in some weird analogy or metaphor. I speak in a lot of metaphors, especially with my students. Luckily, my poetry students like it. It just kind of happens, and then I got to write it down. So I might jot something down on a piece of paper or napkin, or I might text myself, usually speech to text these days, just a little snippet though. And then later on, my favorite way to write still is on the laptop, because my brain starts formulating ideas, and I'm a quick typist. And so that's the fastest way my synapses can connect with what I want to write. Laboriously, I write it down on notebooks, and it just doesn't feel the same unless I'm in a workshop myself. And if that's the journal, that's cool. And then I'll transcribe it later. I always have to transcribe it later. Does it look the way I need it to look yet until I've typed it out? And I could start messing around with stanzas and line breaks and form in that sense. But lots of times I'm writing poems late at night after I've done graded or put the dogs to bed and my daughter to bed. The household is asleep, because I'm just an active night brain person. Which sucks, because in the morning it's kind of tough. I've got an early class. But that's, as a working mother, that's when I can find that kind of reflective, quiet time to write. And that's usually when I'm writing things that will go into a manuscript or be sent out for publication. So it just kind of depends. I don't say no to anything. If there's a random prompt or a process, I'll try it. But that's the cycle I've kind of found myself in over the last years and years of writing.
And we have a lot of people part of our Chachalaca review community. They're part of it because they want to be, or they are artists themselves. Do you have any other tips for aspiring artists?
Yeah, like, no idea is too far-fetched or fantastical. Even if you're like, man, I have an idea for a novel, write down your idea. Even if you think, when am I going to write a novel? Or even if you have a bunch of ideas for a novel somewhere in your bottom drawer by your 20s, write it down, because you never know. Let the inspiration hit you, and then review it later or when you get a chance. Everybody has to work and has all these responsibilities. We're inundated constantly with the flow of the world, but get your ideas down, because I think that that's the magical part. And then everything else, that process, you got to stitch things together. And then that's like a cartographer. You're like putting your map together. I just recently wrote an essay, and I had all these ideas, and I wrote them down, and I was like, how am I going to get 4,000 words for this scholarly article? And then that was the labor, that was like, to the point where I didn't even want to look at my laptop or sit down to it. And I forced myself to write this section or that section. And I'm no painter or photographer, not really. So I don't understand exactly how other mediums flow, but I think I can understand across mediums and genres the act of inspiration. So honor that when lightning strikes, you know, because that's gold right there. That's something to be cherished when you get these creative ideas, you know, and don't let anybody say, oh, there you go again, you know. Just keep at it, because it's the inspiration, and then it's that perspiration that it takes to kind of execute it. But hopefully that they can stay harmonious along the way, you know. So I suppose that's my advice.
Lastly, Jessica, would you mind reading some of your featured work?
I have this one particular piece I'll read. It's called I Have Many Names. And it will be in the full collection Kantbom. That's going to be released in February 2019 by Swimming with Elephants Publications. I have many names. Tengo muchos nombres. You may call me Malinche, goddess of grass, indigena woman of the kidnapped clan, Rosetta Stone tongue, glassy rain-soaked imperial jade, Moctezuma's poison trade with the white-skinned transgressor, Quetzalcoatl Cortez, flesh over the forged heat of Spanish blade, the Dutch, the French, the mulatto, the mestiza, Africana, rape daughters of the doctrine of discovery. You may call me the descendant of the deceased, the disappeared, the pillaged, the blood quantum kickback treaty fed by the belly fat of land grant lies. I have many names, thousands years old names, ancient mighty names. But today you may call me 7 generations missing from my grandmother, Tonacin, Malinali, Tlatzoteo, Ometeo. I am the blood lineage sacrificial ancestor, progeny of the gone missing women. Call me Maquiladora, flower of the factories, woman of what is twice bit and betrayed both by my own kin and the foreign rapist. You may call me rage, righteous, vengeful. Tengo muchos nombres. You may call me Soldadera, matriarch of the Mexican Revolution. I was never anyone's lover, no Pancho Villa bed warmer, bullets and braids, hands thick like the skin of tamal. This is what you may call me. No, yo soy Joaquin. You may call me Llorona, shapeshifter, picket line provocateur, brown beret, skinwalker, woman of the field, hands of callus, picker of fresa, chile, cebolla, and the grape on the vine. We, the legions of farm workers bent at the spine, fingers deep into the dark earth. Today, they will call me wet nurse, wetback, under the table paid brown nanny, breast milk by proxy, but I birthed me in the shape of me, blade sharp, obsidian, flint and fired stone. I am the bloodletting and the baptismal. I have many names. Tengo muchos nombres. But you may invoke me, brown skin, puta, chola, chingona, spelled with the X like the Mexica do. My ancestors who run wild in my blood, my messy, colonized, mixed, and triumphant blood. You may call me double-tongued and code switcher, river crosser, water diviner, border dweller, and burnt sage. You know me as hashtag me too, the Bridget hair of Frida's brow, snapped spinal column survivor, the late night mariachi howl eater of filth. You may call me Bocha, Jota, Bruja, and lit from within. My name, an anglicized stain, a Dilaus Campesino, short hair and clipped tongue, somewhere in the middle of Indio, California, fruit basket of the world. But now you may invoke me, Dolores, Lorna, Sandra, Maria, Josefina, Gloria, Diana the Huntress, Emma Gonzalez, and Alicia Garza, Matriz, Opal, Audrey Lord, writer and patron saint of all who watches over us. You may call me La Cazadora, huntress, no regrets. I am the keeper of the dead. Tengo muchos nombres. You may call me thought woman, carrier of stories, jeweled egg of a diaphanous web. My children spring forth from me, silver-headed, spindle soft, ready to recreate the world. 7th generation rising. I am un manflora, the bad flower who grew despite your attempt to rename that which is nameless.
Thank you very much for joining us on this interview with Jessica. Remember to check out more of Jessica at jessicahelenlopezpoet.wordpress.com. For the special feature on Jessica, check out Volume 4 of the Chachalaca Review at chachalacareview.com. Thank you.